Hello friends, my name is Akib and welcome to my channel Developers Point. In this video, we'll be discussing the brief introduction on Entity Framework. तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं. Let's begin. What we are going to take a look at now is a brief introduction to Entity Framework, something that we are going to use in our deployment of our application. And we are going to take a look at this introduction just to give you a sense of where it fits in our application and we use it for. So first question is, well, what is it for? It's an object relational mapper and its job is to translate our code into SQL commands that update our tables into database. Now coming to .NET 3.5, which was released a long time ago in 2002, .NET, not .NET Core to 3.5, we are talking about the original .NET framework. We often used to write something called idiot.NET code to save and retrieve our application data from our underlying database. We would have to open a connection to a database, create a dataset to fetch or submit the data, and then convert the data from dataset to a .NET object. It was a prone process because we would be writing that database access code as a SQL code, which would be in the form of strings. And it is very easy to make mistakes. So Microsoft has introduced a framework called Entity Framework to automate all these database related activities for our application. So what we have at the moment is an app user entity, just a simple class that we have created with an ID property that's an integer and a string property for a username. What we are going to introduce is entity framework, and when we add entity framework, we need to create an important class that derives the database context class that we get with entity framework. Now this class acts as a bridge between our domain or entity classes and the database, and this DB context class is the primary class we use for interacting with our database. Now the entity framework work with database providers. Now the one we are going to use purely for development is SQLite. SQLite means we don't need to install a database server and SQL. Like just use a file to store our database. Now SQLite is not production worthy, but it's a great database for development purpose because it's very portable. And we don't need to install anything, and it simply adds a file into our database folder for the database. Later on we will be taking a look at changing this to a production worthy database. But for development and for now, we are just going to stick with SQLite right now. I know some of you guys are going to be saying, can't we just use SQL Server? Yes, of course you can. But for development, I am going to stick with SQLite because SQL Server is not a cross-platform, whereas SQLite is. It will work on any OS, so our SQLite provider or our database provider is responsible for translating our link queries and insert the values inside there, and we'll add that particular user into our database. So just a couple of features to go through. Entity Framework allows us to query our database using link queries that I mentioned very briefly before. It also gives us a chance of tracking or keep a track of its own framework, and will keep a track of changes occurring in our entity which need to be submitted to a database. It also allows us to save the database, and Entity Framework will execute insert, update, delete commands. As the DB context class gives us a save changes method that we can use, we will see that very soon. It also gives us a concurrency. It uses optimistic concurrency by default to protect overwriting changes made by another user, since the data was fetched from the database. Also deals with transactions, and it provides automatic transaction management or saving data. It also includes first level of caching, so repeated queries will return the data from the cache instead of hitting the database. It also offers built-in conventions. When I was talking about ID property needs to be named as ID is because Entity Framework follows conventions and includes a set of default rules which automatically configure the Entity Framework schema or the model that we are using to create our database. We can also configure our database or entities, and there is a way to configure this. So to do that, we can override the conventions if we wish to do so. And it also offers us migration, and we'll take a look at this soon. But this gives us the ability to create a database schema so that when we start our application or we run a particular command, we can automatically generate our database in our database server. Now these are pretty powerful and very convenient because they take a look at our code that we write and then create the appropriate database that we need, or the database schema that we need to manage our database. So we don't need to create our database manually. Entity Framework will do this for us. There is another way around. This is referred to as a code first database creation, and you can do it the other way around. You can create the database first if you want, and then go ahead and create your entities to match up with the database. But it's far more convenient to use migrations to do so, and all of these features will be taken a look in the coming video. So please take a look at the next video. Till then, please like, share and subscribe to my channel Developers Point. Thank you.